Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. If you're joining us live, if you're watching on the replay, thank you also very much. We are happy to have you here. It is SciChat Saturday, where we get into some interesting conversations around the issues going on in science currently. And as you all can see today, I am not alone, as it were. Today, I have with me Anna Krylov. I'm personally really excited. I've been looking forward to having you on for this conversation. And as some of my friends behind the scenes would note, I was very nervous to press the send button on the invitation because it's just like, no, I don't know how this is going to work. What am I going to do? Get very nervous about that. So let's see. Proper introductions first. So. Anna Krylov is a professor of chemistry at the University of Southern California, born and raised in Donetsk, Ukraine, then the Soviet Union. Anna received her Master's of Science, is that correct? Or is that?
Yep, master.
From Moscow State University in 1990, and her PhD from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1996. Following postdoctoral training at the University of California, Berkeley, she joined USC's chemistry department in 1998. Her research is in theoretical and computational quantum chemistry, where she develops theoretical methods and software for open shell and electronically excited species, including metastable states. At the moment, she has over 300 published scientific papers and more than 300 invited talks and seminars. As you can guess, she has many, many awards, of which a few of them include the Plyer Prize, the Plyer Prize for Molecular Spectroscopy and Dynamics. Of course, I picked the longest one to say. The Xerox Medal, the Bessel Research Award, the Wise Architects of Enduring Change Award, the Hannah Riesler Mentoring Award, and the Mellon Mentoring Award, the Associates Award for Creativity in Research and Scholarship also. She's a fellow of multiple societies, including the American Chemical Society, the American Physical Society, and the Royal Society of Chemistry, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And as you can guess, lots of awards and accolades, but more to the point of our discussion today, Anna is very active in the promotion of gender equality in STEM fields. She created and maintains the web directory Women in Theoretical and Computational Chemistry, Material Science, and Biochemistry. She is also a very outspoken advocate of freedom of speech and academic freedom. She's a founding member of the Academic Freedom Alliance and a member of its Academic Leadership Committee. Her paper, The Peril of Politicizing Science, which launched a national conversation among scientists and the general public on the growing influence of political ideology over STEM, has received over 95,000 views and has been translated into other languages, including Polish and Estonian. And that I think that's how we first started talking, was I actually created a video on your Peril of Politicizing Science article, and we started talking from there. Welcome, Anna. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Fun to be on the show, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much for coming. And Kieran, I see you're excited, and I saw your questions already put in there, but let's start from one thing. So yeah, the Peril of Politicizing Science, I think we actually looked at it before. It's closing in on 97,000 views now, which is amazing in and of itself. But I know a question that I had for a long time was, what prompted you to get into, what were you seeing that prompted you to start writing that article?
I think many things were kind of bothering me, because the way, you wake up, you open your email box, and then you have a barrage of crazy things coming at you from your professional societies. But what actually prompted me, what was the last straw, was a review I received as an editor. So I was handling a routine paper for the Physical Chemistry, Chemical Physics journal, and the paper was about computational studies of molecules that potentially can improve solar cell efficiency. And so I sent paper for review. Reviews came back. They were the usual mix of, you have to explain this better, you need to do another calculation, you need to cite these few more papers, and then one of the reports contains the closing sentence saying that, well, the authors mentioned the Shockley-Queisser limit, and this refers to an estimation of maximum efficiency of single junction solar cell, how much efficiency they can deliver when everything works perfectly. And they mentioned this limitation as the motivation for their work, and technically this is the correct name, but the authors may want to reconsider calling it Shockley and Queisser limit, because Shockley was a racist, and then this reviewer provided a link to the reference to a paper published in a professional magazine, which I went and read, which was a long rant about how we should rename everything to make science more inclusive and more just. And that was really last straw, and I just couldn't take it anymore, because it reminded me so vividly about how things were in Russia when things were, names were removed, pictures were photoshopped. Well, they didn't have Photoshop then, but there were other techniques, and I just couldn't keep quiet any longer.
Yeah, it was the ancient, well, not really the ancient, but the older equivalent of Photoshop, where it was just rewriting books and republishing books, that kind of thing in the Soviet Union. If at least that's what I remember from my grandparents who were Estonian.
Yeah, books were rewritten, and newspapers and archives were, I do not know the English word, airbrushed, I think, airbrushed to remove the pictures. And that was done actually not with the quality available today. And one of the running jokes was that if you look at historic pictures in encyclopedia or in newspapers, you will often see that the number of feet on the photographs divided by 2 does not always equal to number of heads in the photograph.
Yeah, suddenly the heads are taken off. Folks disappear. Yeah, we can do that with Photoshop for sure, but yeah, in Soviet Union it was a little bit more than just taking it out of an image, because I can recall that from my grandmother's story. Actually, several members of her family were killed by the Bolsheviks, including my great grandfather, who was a mayor of a town in Estonia. He wasn't a big fan of the Soviet Union, and spoke against the party. And I mean, one day he didn't come home. So it was those kinds of things that were. I guess one of the things that bugs me with like current things in the politicization of STEM is that there's a lack of perspective in terms of the things like what we're talking about what the Soviet Union did and what Nazi Germany did to scientists compared to today, and some of the parallels that are there. Though I know one of the critiques of discussing it that way is, well, that's really hyperbolic. That's not going to happen here. It's hyperbolic to think about that. And I think Dorian's gotten that criticism before. That was one of the things that people off about his MIT appearance, was the previous article with Ivan about DEI, and going in. It was believed at the time to be a little bit hyperbolic, but
yeah, I disagree with this critique, and I think people say that because they are not fully familiar with history. And one can point out here. I actually have it on my desk. I read this series of the books by Victor Klemperer. So he wrote. He was writing diaries. He was a professor of Gallic culture in Germany, and he was writing diaries about how things were progressing. And after the war, these diaries were published. And what is interesting to note is that the atrocities, the mass extinctions, the concentration camps, it took a while for them to be built and to be deployed. And the early days of Nazis taking over were relatively quiet, and they started with things like certifying stores as Aryan and non-Aryans, and encouraging residents to shop in Aryan stores and boycott non-Aryan stores. And then they didn't fire Jews from the universities. Klemperer was Jewish, so they didn't fire them right away, but they first removed them from examinations. They say that Jews cannot take examinations of Aryan students, and then so things progressed. But about Soviet Union, maybe this is more relevant because it's really history that I witnessed myself, and many things at our time, which was like 80s, 70s, late 70s, there was not so many political dissidents in the camps, and people were not thrown to jail right away. So you really had to be very outspoken to be punished severely. But there was a lot of other mechanisms to make your life miserable, and social ostracism was deployed very effectively. If you have thoughts, or maybe speaking up too much, a assembly could be organized at your school or a workplace where you would be subjected to public ostracism, and then maybe a friendly conversation with a KGB representative saying that like, for your own good, you might reconsider. So yeah, and a lot of things were done in this way, and so I can see a lot of parallels with how things are done nowadays. So we should not underestimate the effect that social ostracism or professional punishments can have on people. So, and I do not think it's hyperbolic. I think parallels are very well justified.
Yeah, and it's perspective and things to learn from. And I think the saying goes, it's not that history repeats itself. It may not repeat, but it often rhymes. That there are certain
Mm-hmm.
things that come back again and again in history, and this kind of thing seems to be one of them. Unfortunately, you would think that liberal democracy and wanting to be tolerant to a degree of varying viewpoints and what have you would lend us to recognizing when that kind of intolerance can slowly build
Mm-hmm.
into atrocities, really is what happened in history. But um,
Mm-hmm.
we seem to forget those kinds of things, which is not healthy, because I mean it's those kinds of things led to not just atrocities um in just in general public, but also in terms of science. Because I mean, I think of Trofim Lysenko right away because
Mm-hmm.
he was very promoted by Stalin, despite being very wrong. And anyone who
Mm-hmm.
disagreed with him suddenly was, well, either had to recant or was had to pay a fee or ended up in prison or executed, was the other situation.
Mm-hmm.
We forget these kinds of things can happen.
Yeah, it's very dangerous when a body that has power, like party in Soviet Union and government, when they decide to take stance on scientific issues and deploy their power to censor and direct science. Because Lysenko, yeah, he was like nutcase. People know about his work on agriculture and ideas like Lamarckianism, that you can permanently change organism by just exposing it to stressors. Like you can freeze seeds and they will grow better in cold climates, things of that nature. But he also believed, for example, that cuckoo birds, they are not distinct species, but cuckoo chicks are being born when other species of birds eat certain things. So, I mean, it's
Really?
like, yeah, so he was really, which is not exactly surprising because he was one of the, uh, so he came from a very poorly educated background. He couldn't read by till the age of 14. And he probably had some talents because he was advancing, but he wasn't really well-educated scientist. So anyway, it's okay to have a loony scientist. We have a lot of loony scientists. So that's a normal and healthy state of science. But what was unhealthy in Soviet Russia is that party decided that he is right and his ideas are good, and those who oppose his ideas are agents of bourgeois and imperialism worldwide, and then things that you mentioned, unravel. So so I think it's a great lesson there, and now we see how some ideas in biology are declared to be politically incorrect and taboo. And so there are a lot of parallels with Lysenkoism.
And that's despite there still being published studies that reinforce a lot of the things that we know now from biology too, which is interesting. And it's just like political preference for one flawed view over another is going to be a detriment. Although this actually brings me to a critique that I have seen now come up repeatedly of yourself and of Dorian, and I probably would add me in this category myself, in that well you're pointing at a boogeyman for one thing in academia. It's not really there. That critical social justice thing, it's not really there. We don't know what you're talking about. It's not really a problem. Why are you ignoring all the things that Republican governors are doing to put pressure on academia? So it's basically it's a bit of a logical fallacy argument, because obviously no one knows what you all actually think of that, but it's like, you're not necessarily ignoring that. You see censorship either way is a bad thing when it comes from a political party, but it's a notable critique I've noticed, and it comes up in particular when we talked about this before we started with John Herbert in the Royal Society of Chemistry article that he did. That was basically his closing premise, was that anybody who's been pushing for academic freedom of late is really just pushing right-wing grievance.
Which is preposterous, of course. So, that's, I think, a misconception, and that's also one of the motivations that prompted me to write more. And the most recent paper that you covered on your podcast, In Defense of Merit in Science, provide extensive exhibits of what's happening now in science. And we focused on the attacks on merit and how they are being converted and implemented in policies that I think, and my co-authors think, are very detrimental to science, such as, for example, including non-merit-based criteria in scientific funding, and including non-scientific and criteria based on immutable characteristics of scientists in hiring, and so on. So there are quite a few exhibits in this paper that show that it is indeed happening. So we give a lot of long list of papers published in top outlets, Science, Nature, Lancet, and so on, where we show that papers that openly anti-scientific, declare science racist and sexist, and blame science for all evils in the world and society. I mean, literally, I'm not making it up. And calling for dismantling everything, and more or less. So, and I thought it was very important to give this long list, because often when you mention a particularly outrageous example, people would just roll their eyes at, it's just an outlier. It's one crazy paper. Like, who cares? It's a noise. And my point is that no, it's not a noise. Like, which one of 67 papers published in the special issue of Chemical Education talking about decolonizing chemistry curriculum and exploring gender identity in the chemistry room. Which one is the outlier? Right.
And which of these things are actually important? Because like if you're a chemist, I really don't care what your gender identity is. That's irrelevant, or at least it should be. I think
That's the beauty of science. It's open to everyone.
Mhm.
And if you are interested, if you like chemistry, you can do chemistry, you are in. So it doesn't matter what your color, gender, religion, and whatever else you might personal characteristics you can imagine. So, and that's now being dismantled.
Or no, there's at least an attempt to dismantle it
Mhm.
at this point. But yeah, I meant to I was wanting to ask because the I remember reading it and I thought to myself, there's no way that could have come up that one of the reviews originally, because I mean, you all tried to get In Defense of Merit published
Mhm.
in the PNAS and Proceedings of
Mhm.
National Academy of Sciences, amongst others. And as I
Mhm.
recall, one of the comments was that merit is hurtful or it was hollow or something along that. I was like, no. I was thinking to myself, there's no way that
Yeah, so I have in writing. So we get this comment when we first inquired about possibility of submit this paper into PNAS. The editor, we ultimately get green line to submit, but we get recommendation, a suggestion to remove inflammatory language. And when I inquired what part of the paper was inflammatory, then we get this comments that the editorial board was concerned that we are using the word merit in the title. And the editor said, as you and your co-authors surely know, the concept of merit is being widely and legitimately attacked as hollow. So that generated, a lot of so uh, a lively discussion amongst our co-author. And one co-author said, "Yeah, we need to rename the paper in defense of M star 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 in science."
well, that certainly would have been an interesting title if hard to pronounce, but
Yeah.
I'm just it. Oh man.
But it's not just editorial board. The last reference in our merit paper, which I added in proofs, refers to the diversity report from the National Academy of Science, which
Mhm.
was published just in February, I think. And it's a remarkable document. You can download this PDF file from their website, and it repeatedly says that merit is a social construct. It's not real. Objectivity doesn't exist, and merit is used to perpetuate inequalities. And so, I mean, it's shocking to me because merit is a vehicle by which Western societies achieved incredible progress, technological, scientific, progress in quality of life, and also progress, social progress. Societies became more tolerant, more
Mhm.
accepting, and better for everyone. And it is focused on merit, for example, that made American science what it is by allowing people that come from different background, people like myself, to come in and compete on the open marketplace of ideas, get jobs, get funding, and deliver excellent science. If you look at the list of Nobel laureates, you will see how many of them are coming, for example, from American universities, and then you can look how many of them are not Americans, not educated in America, but came through this merit-based system and found jobs and delivered excellent science. So, I mean, I can go on and on talking, giving examples about how merit-based science helps society, and that's why one of the reasons why I feel such an urgent need to push back against this attacks on merit, because I think it's extremely detrimental to science and also ultimately to the society.
Mm. Well, and it's with merit that you can ultimately that societies ultimately claim to the conclusion that it doesn't necessarily matter what your race is, so long as because you can produce the same quality and level of quality, not level of quality, but the same quality of work and robust
Mm.
and rigorous research, it doesn't matter really. And we
Yeah,
wouldn't have done that if it weren't for actually being committed to merit at the start, as most liberal democracies and Western nations are.
that was a radical idea of enlightenment, that you can judge people by merit and not by their class. So it's not, you do not need to be born in aristocratic family to have merit. So you can just raise to the top by your accomplishments. And it was a very radical idea at the time, and it turned out to be a working idea that led to great progress. But
Mm.
yeah, so
And this is one of the things that's come up too, is just like I think I've seen it in one of the critiques of In Defense of Merit, which I think I shared it indirectly through one of the email threads that we're on,
mhm,
but the one of the
mhm.
critiques involved, well, merit doesn't work perfectly all the time, therefore we should throw it out. That's kind of the general argument that
Yeah. So I've seen a lot of this, uh, and I think it's a very flawed argument. So I see it not only with merit. The picture I have, the mental picture I have. Let's say you have a machine, complicated machine that apparatus that does something, and then you find out that the apparatus is not 100% effective and has a flaw in it. So, okay, so what do you do if you have such machine at your home? You call a technician, and the technical technician comes with a little screwdriver and tune it up, and it continues to work. Now, what I think people that attack merit on these grounds have in mind that, okay, we have a merit-based system in science, scientific policies, and we are not 100% effective. We have flaws. We have sometimes people that deserve to get tenure do not get tenure, and sometimes we have the other way. People that do not deserve tenure do get tenure. So okay, let's come with a big axe and chop this machine into pieces and do something else. So yeah, so the way I think, so we have actually the entire section in the paper when we talk about difficulties in assessing merit, which are legitimate. And like my friends say, it's very easy to rank chess players because you just let them play one against the other. You have very simple scale, and you can put everyone on one-dimensional scale. Simple. Now, it's not that simple in science because we do not have a simple equation, and there are many components entering into the consideration. But the system, in my opinion, is very robust, and there are ways by which merit can be evaluated by taking into account simple quantitative metrics such as publications and impact, and also including non-quantitative metrics such as assessments of experts that would give a detailed analysis why certain research is important or not important, and what are flaws and what are strengths. So the system is working pretty well, in my opinion, despite limitations and imperfections. And of course, we should be focusing on imperfections and trying to further improve it. But the idea that because we have some small wrinkle in the system, we should completely dismantle it, that just doesn't work for me.
well, no, and in general, I agree, although I think there's with the politicization of science, generally there's concerns that I have as to how well peer review is going to do, or if peer review itself is going to become, in a way, a filter just to filter out things that we don't like. We being the groupthink
Mm-hmm.
large that pushes towards particular things. And I think of In Defense of Merit as one example of that, in that if for whatever reason merit itself becomes taboo amongst scientists, then
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be hard to publish anything on that vein. And in similar kind of thoughts, if there's you can't say X. I mean, you've written about the language policing in the editorial space with the Royal Society of Chemistry. And that's one thing that comes to mind is like, well, hang on a second, you're filtering out ideas just because you don't like the idea, not because it's not meritorious, that it doesn't have some value
Mhm.
as argument. Um, I know part of me is wondering how the heck did we get to this place where this is even a problem that we have to argue about it now. That's what I've been wondering.
Yeah, I do not know. Yeah, it's, I think, would be good topic for historians and social scientists to find out. I think there is a big component of kind of power grab here, and I think the big problem that a big, contributor to that is that we allowed to create bureaucracies, highly paid bureaucracies that whose job is to promote so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is not anything but diversity, equity, and inclusion, based on what they actually do. And
I have a lot of thoughts on DEI, but please continue first. We can get there.
yeah, and these bureaucracies need to justify their existence, and then that's what you get. They create this list of forbidden words. They create these trainings, and they have all the time on their hands. So it's very hard to fight against them because we are practicing scientists. We do not really have time and bandwidth to push back against it. We need to focus on our research, teaching, mentoring students, and those other people, they have all the time to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I read a recent report. It's something like 60% of university costs now come down to administrative bureaucracies rather than anything else. At least I'm trying to remember where I read that, so I can't recall the exact source.
Yeah, there were statistics that show how student tuition is increasing, and then you can show on the same plot how faculty salaries are increasing, and you see that faculty salaries are relatively flat, tuition goes through the roof, and then the curve that goes tuition increase is administrative costs. So that's one issue, but DI is something new. It's like on top of it, and DI doesn't take 40% of cost, but they are very costly bureaucracies. That yeah, I can give you some numbers how much it costs for university, but I mean, there is definitely big money there, so you can use the old maxim, follow the money, so you will find out.
Follow the money, you can find it everywhere. Um,
Mhm,
yeah. Oh, what the
mhm,
Anna, can you hear me? Okay. I just had a momentary technical difficulty in which I actually
mhm,
had all my computer monitors turn off. So
mhm.
just had a
Not good.
I thought I just lost everything. Oh my gosh, that would have been terrible. Um,
Mhm,
I don't know what happened. That was different. Sorry about that.
mhm,
Let's see. So I was I tend to wonder if some of the things that we're seeing now, because I think it was one critique that I had of the In Defense of Merit article was
mhm,
not I think the things proposed are great. It was more so an addendum, something else that should
mhm,
be done in that I've talked about this. Thank you, Kieran. I appreciate that. I talked about this ad nauseum on the channel in that I got my PhD in 2016 and
mhm,
never once I had to think about it at length and go back through my notes because back here in my closet, I kept all my old notebooks from undergrad all the way through. So go back and refer to anything I ever need. But I even took a philosophy of science class in my undergrad, and never once could I did I find that I was actually taught about the Mertonian norms or
mhm,
the liberal Western liberal tradition and how that's related to science and why it's a good thing. So it's been a common critique that I've had that yes, it's all the other stuff we talked about as potential things to do to push back are relevant, but I think that's somewhat lost if we're not teaching the younger. generation, like my generation and younger, why this stuff is good, because then that allows some of the more postmodern
Mhm.
activist kind of groups to get in and fill in the notion, well, we need to decolonize
Mhm.
chemistry, whatever
Mhm.
the heck that actually means. Because there's not actually, this is the other problem. There's not actually good definitions for any of these things, I don't
Mhm.
think. It's just get rid of anything Western is what it seems like to mean.
Mhm.
Um, but what do you think of that? Because then you've already said it. Scientists and researchers at universities are already so strapped with, we need to get our research done. We're teaching students. We're writing grants. We're doing all these other things. But at the same time, this would seem something important to be teaching. To be teaching.
Yeah, yeah. I do not know. I agree that understanding philosophy of science better and also history
Mm,
would hopefully make people more aware of the dangers of these ideologies and make them uh, more uh, yeah, more sensitized to be able to figure out what different ideas mean and where they are coming from. At the same time, I remember when I was in school, okay, well, we were actually taught, but not Mertonian norms, but Marxist Leninism approach to science and
no.
everything. So we had a lot of these courses. So, uh, but truth is that when I was an undergraduate, I was struggling with understanding my field, struggling to learn chemistry, to get immersed into technical details and become an expert in my immediate domain. And at that time, I think these ideas would sound very abstract to me
Mm,
because I think you do need some depth and to become a practicing science to develop interest into them. So I do agree that we need to teach these ideas somewhere, but maybe undergraduate courses are not the best place. Maybe it should be done as part of graduate curriculum when students are already in the lab and they have a little more feel how science is actually done, like it would be very abstract for an undergraduate student to talk about peer review process. Yeah, but if you published couple of papers and had to deal with the responses, referee reports, communicating with the editor, then it become a little bit more concrete, and then you can start understanding why people would ask questions like, what do we do with reviewer biases? What are limitations of peer review process?
mm.
What is the role of the editor? So then, yeah. So I think probably graduate school is where we need to do that.
I could see that, and taught very much by the professors in the department, not necessarily from philosophy department necessarily, but by the science professors themselves. I think would
Mm-hmm.
probably be really valuable since they hopefully practice it all the time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or so we would hope at
Yeah.
this point. Some
Yeah.
folks I'm not so sure because I think of peer review and like you were saying about the machine, sometimes it's not perfect. It's requires
Mm-hmm.
tweaks and things like that. And like one of the things I thought of as a failure of peer review, when you were saying that is was an article that appeared in PLOS One. I covered it on the channel a while back. Was about fit hacks, things to do to make your mask, your N95
Mm.
mask fit better during COVID. And I showed this to a few different folks where I work, and it was everybody was asking, how the hell did that get published? Because it was a sample size of 4 people.
A nice sample size.
Sample size of 4 people, and the
Yeah.
conclusion was that the best fit hack to get your mask to fit better, I'm not kidding about this, is pantyhose. Pantyhose in the face. Um, and the only reason it came up is when you look at one of the graphics, the only reason it came up was like there were only 3 people that reviewed the pantyhose. For whatever reason, the fourth person didn't want to wear pantyhose on their face. Um, and the only reason it rated the highest is because one person really loved the pantyhose. So when the average of 3 came out, that was the one with the highest score in their results. And it's funny, but at the same time, that's one of the ones I look at as a
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
peer review.
yeah. Well, we have in our field there is a garbage papers being published, and that's okay. So peer review process is not perfect. There are historic examples also about some important ideas having difficult time to be published. And one example, I think, very interesting, Lee Jassim wrote about it in his paper about censorship and scholarship suppression, where he describes how the findings that ulcers, stomach ulcers, are caused by bacteria and not by stress and poor diet. So it was a revolutionary idea,
Mm.
and it took quite significant time to get it through peer review, to publish it and bring it. So, um, so this is all fine, because we know that despite these imperfections, or maybe inertia, or maybe biases, whatever you attribute these difficulties to, we know that ultimately machine is working correctly, and the bulk of scientific publications are sound, and we also have we know that those publications that are garbage, they kind of some of them, when they are like manifestly wrong, get retracted. We have mechanism for that. Some of them that are not manifestly wrong, just blah, they just go into oblivion and not enjoying high attention rate, and cream rises to the top. The correct meritorious ideas, they ultimately win, and despite this imperfections of the system, they come to the top.
Hmm. But I would think that in the vein of the politicization of science and the interaction potentially with peer review is
Mm.
that depends somewhat on the reviewers, and that it does depend somewhat on the reviewers being themselves representative of different perspectives and approaches to a problem, in that as humans, of course, we have our own particular biases per se, and that's what peer review is in one way, is designed to check, to find the
Mhm.
meritorious thing and to account for those biases. But as we have the, or at least seems to be, increasing um number of scientists who are more interested in activism,
Mhm.
or incorporating some political activism as part of their science, despite research showing that that's probably a bad idea. We can get to that in a minute too. But
Mhm.
the I guess the concern that I have is that, are we running into a point, perhaps with censorship of some and the promotion of a groupthink in others, that um, you end up not having as robust of a peer review process, because people because the scientists reviewing seem to come from the same perspective and just don't challenge it. Well, it confirms what I already think, so I'm just going to let it go through review. Uh,
Yeah, there is this problem, and also there is a contagion if editorial boards are taken up by activists and by people with particular viewpoints that could derail the process. So my only hope is that there is a competition still, and if some scientific journals get completely taken over by certain cliques, then maybe some new journals will open, and will allow people to uh, publish their findings. But yeah, it is a serious consideration and concern. And what I want to say is that, we have examples. I think you covered this Nature Human Behavior editorial, where the editorial board explicitly stated that they will not publish things that they will consider hurtful for groups or populations, and that they will engage activists and interest groups to help them, judge what is hurtful and what is not, and harmful. So now I was shocked to see a research paper published in PNAS again
Mhm.
that talked about creating ethics review boards.
Oh, yeah.
And ethics review boards, of course, exist at universities, and when you submit a paper, proposal that includes research with animals or humans, ethics review boards are looking into it to make sure that everything is done ethically and properly. So that's fine, that's not controversial. But this PNAS paper says that it's not enough, and we should scrutinize all research for potential harms for groups or populations that are not in this. And then the arguments they had like this big, so they already have pilot project where they have a board like that, and they tried this idea in the context of computer science and artificial intelligence. So not in some social science. So that's kind of getting pretty close to home to what I'm doing. And then they had like long list of potential harms that should be scrutinized for when the research proposal goes in. Like one harm was potential co-option of technology for nefarious purposes by bad agents. Okay, anything can be co-opted for nefarious purposes, right? Then another one was potential job harm to population due to job loss due to new technologies. So basically, if I develop new solar cell technology, it will cause job loss in coal industry. Therefore, that creates a harm to specific groups, and it shouldn't be funded. So what else they have? They also research that will increase social gaps because of barriers of using technology in poor populations. So basically, any technology, any progress should be like stopped right now because it may not benefit equally in the beginning different populations. So that was a research paper. They have this proposal, and it was just a proposal and the pilot project, but you know how it is. It can become a reality.
Well, and in some places it is something of reality, because I think of like I think it's Department of Energy has something in their peers grant requirements or something along that line for you have to do XYZ thing and DEI and keep track of.
Yeah, that's a very shocking thing, and I really do not know. I mean, it's absolutely, in my opinion, unacceptable to introduce this additional non-science-based criteria in evaluation of funding. Okay? And if you think about it, okay, it's Department of Energy. They have their mission to develop fundamental research that helps to address our energy needs. And now, you have a choice. You have a proposal that had excellent ideas that will advance our energy independence, but it doesn't do enough to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you say, okay, this PI will not get her funding because her plan for advancing diversity was not good enough. And we would, rather fund someone who may not have such a great scientific ideas, but just advancing diversity. I mean, it's just crazy. So that's actually arguably worse than what we had in Soviet Union, because in Soviet Union merit still was recognized, and if you keep your head low and do not argue with the party, the professional advance, and it was based on and resources, allocation of resources were largely based on merit, again, with these strings attached. But here is a direct replacement of merit by social justice criteria.
Yeah, and admittedly, it's concerning for me too. Because I was talking with you about it off air. I don't have tenure, and I probably never will in the career path that I'm going. But at the same time, I'm somewhat dependent upon grant funding in my professional career. So it's just like, wait a second, this stuff that I don't agree with, you're going to make me profess some agreement to it in order to get a grant?
It's a
Because for
compelled speech.
yeah,
Yeah.
for young scientists like me, because technically I'm still early career, and I know others who are too, are looking at this like, are you gonna shaft us out of the rest of our careers? Because well, not you specifically,
Mhm.
I mean
Mhm.
I mean the larger
Mhm.
thing here, you're gonna shaft us out of our careers because, you know, we don't think this is appropriate. We agree that this is ideological compelling and ideological thing,
Mhm.
but at the
Yeah,
same
what
time,
they
we don't
say.
have the ability to we don't have as much power or authority within scientific disciplines to say this isn't right and be listened to necessarily sometimes.
Yeah, people say, oh, but you do not need to write something, like you can write what you think about diversity, like, but then we know how it's used, and
That doesn't work with those
um,
DEI rubrics.
right, it doesn't. No, I do not know if you've seen this. There was this great paper in the Wall Street Journal where John Saylor he used the Freedom of Information Act to get some documents, memos from faculty searches in Texas Tech. And he specifically was looking of how DEI statements were evaluated and how candidates were evaluated on their DEI standing. And if you read, this document, there is like absolutely no doubt there. It's
Mm.
not just, oh, we want to hear what you think. There were very specific expectations, and people were punished for things like one thing that kind of caught my attention. There was one candidate who was downgraded because he or she said that, well, in other countries there are much more serious problems with equality, with so they didn't
Yeah.
want to hear anything about it.
I can see
So
what
yeah.
happened there, that somebody just, somebody didn't like being told that when they were seeing that DEI statement, although it's probably very true that there are other much more serious problems in other countries.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So that's yeah. So we know how these DI statements are evaluated in many places. It doesn't mean that they're evaluated in the same way in every place, but I think we have enough information to understand that there are compelled speech and political litmus tests where you are judged by how well you align with these dominant ideas.
Yeah. Kieran, I think I'm going to paraphrase your question here to try and get it a little shorter since you have it on two chats here. Because he had an interesting question that
Mm-hmm.
that I think goes back to the issue of, how did things get to the point that um that we have. And he was asking, a lot of these activists subsets, folks who come in with this political activist mentality of social embracing social justice and what have you, also have an ends justify the means kind of mindset, whereby
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to justify cancel culture as just consequences culture or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
because we can get to this ideological thing that we want. um but does it demonstrate that in the fundamental essence of science, driven by curiosity and openness and pushing the boundaries, does it kind of demonstrate that science has provided somewhat of a fertile ground for this kind of infiltration in terms of its openness? Or do you think that merit properly practice could countervene some of these kinds of nefarious things?
Uh, that's a good question. Well, so it's kind of, you can phrase it even in a more broad way. Uh, and you can point out that democracy and enlightenment values are inherently vulnerable because they do not censor, they do not suppress other ideas, they allow everyone to speak, and they allow people that obviously object ideas of enlightenment and democracy to openly and actively express and pursue their ideas. So I think part of the infiltration is an example of this. Merit, yeah, I think applying merit more diligently would prevent some of it. But yeah, if you hire faculty by merit, then you probably will not get that many social justice activists. If professional societies would be focused strictly on their original mission, supporting and advancing their respective disciplines, they probably would not provide any ground for all kind of activists that subvert their mission. But yeah, I'm not a good person probably to speculate of how to fight this infiltration and what should have been done differently.
Well, no, I think it's a good answer because and yeah, the broader thing with liberal democracy, we do allow so nefarious actors can use the same tools that we could use to defend.
Mhm,
I think that's the point that you were saying here, Kieran. If I'm
mhm,
right, I say this all the time as a libertarian that in and of itself provides the same tools used by bad actors to attack.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm.
so
Yeah.
goes to some of the
Well, it just means that we should be more active in defending what we think is right. And that's, I think, where the weakness of uh, people that believe in enlightenment and humanism is, because we see that people that oppose these ideas, they are much more militant and they also organize much better. And people like that share generally the ideas of enlightenment and humanism, they are more uh, they do not operate in militant formations of
we also
of groups.
we also have
Mhm.
something of a live and let live kind of mentality, and then they're
Correct.
generally tolerant of different viewpoints, um,
Hmm.
as opposed to the more militant folks who want a
Yeah,
specific viewpoint. I
yeah.
do.
So it's very hard to, you exactly put it exactly right. So it's very hard to fight intolerance with tolerance. So, but we have no choice, right? We have our values, and tolerance is important. Tolerance to different ideas, and how we should fight those ideas that that are intolerant. That's a big question,
Mm.
unsolved question.
And that yeah, that is a trick in terms of how to do it. But yeah, thank you, Kieran. That's another great way to put it. Now that I think about it, it's the whole adage of be open minded, but not so open that your brain falls out. Which
Yeah. So, yeah, there should be some mechanism by which we could limit the influx of crazy ideas, right? So there should be some metric where we can say, okay, so you are entitled to have these crazy ideas, but you are not entitled to have it accepted by your peers. And
now I think one of the things I've noticed is like the Heterodox Academy survey talks about this and what have you.
mhm,
I think it's 60% of students now will self-censor on campus, and it's not necessarily out of fear of the professors as much as that it's out of fear of their colleagues, their fellow students, creating smear campaigns against them,
mhm,
things along that line. And so I do wonder, because these are going to be the next
mhm,
generation of scientists, if they're suddenly so afraid to even talk about anything when you're pushing the boundaries of when you're pushing the boundaries with science, right? We're inadvertently going to step on each other's toes at some point where it's your cherished idea versus my cherished idea, and hopefully you don't get into really personal gripes with each other, but
mhm,
occasionally that does happen too. But I guess I wonder if like modeling free debate for the students and having the faculty be examples of that, as you would hope they would be, though that's not necessarily true anymore in some universities, um, would help to bring that back. That's okay. That's actually a very good thing. Um,
Yeah, yeah, we need to, the biggest kind of the most important part of education is I think, is the ability to discuss, to debate, to poke holes in other people's arguments and not being afraid of people poking holes in your arguments, because that's how we ultimately finding out what is right. And that's integral part of science, absolutely essential. And we see it playing every day. You send your paper to review or you present it at a conference, and then people would just catch every imperfection in your reasoning and your data, and then you will have to learn how to defend what you think is right, how to accept criticism where critics are right, and how to make next step improving your protocols, your techniques. And so without that, we cannot, science would not progress. Now, if you do not teach students how to discuss points where there is a disagreement between two groups, and how to be willing to hear other people's arguments, I mean, it's really concerning to me. Now, I hear stories from my friends, Luana Maroja. She is a professor of biology in Williams College. She was telling me that it's not only that students cannot talk to each other about topics that are controversial because they are afraid to be ostracized by their peers. They cannot even engage without fear in the classroom setup debates. For example, she explains that she had this classroom discussion where she put some topic up, and then she pointed herself two groups and said, this group is in defense of this, and this group is in opposition. And said, I do not care what you think about it, but you present arguments pro and you present arguments con. And, she gave them materials, and once when topic was too hot, too controversial, students just froze and could not utter the anything in defense of the idea that their peers thought is wrong. And that just shows how bad this suppression of conversation and debate is on campus.
mm,
And I do not know what should be done. It's professors, I think the extent of self-censorship and is even higher. There were recent surveys, including one in MIT, and the numbers are as high as 60 to 80% among faculty,
mm.
among tenure faculty. So, I mean,
Yeah, and actually, when I
um,
reviewed the last, campus expression survey of Heterodox Academy, it was a
mhm,
comment that I made that it'd be great to see some of some of the thoughts there from faculty on the same kinds of
mhm,
questions. This is a good question we can jump off of. Are
mhm.
students being intentionally used as a proxy, or do you believe this is a sort of social contagion of self-policing born out of the current climate as a whole?
I think it's more of the second. There is this, that's a part of it. I think is the effect of social media. And Jonathan Haidt had an excellent essay in Atlantic where he described how this social media promotes this ostracism and gives disproportionate platform to sociopathic behaviors, and how it affects the um, discourse and climate on campus and in the society. Uh, However, there is a little bit of a truth to the first one, and there are examples, and I know of some when faculty activists are inciting students to protest, to ostracize, to run cancellation campaigns, and so that happens too. But I think the second part is more has more to do with the current climate.
Mm. And I wonder, like, the organization of those campaigns, and particularly against a few very prominent such campaigns, if that really does encourage, because admittedly, I'm going back to John Herbert's commentary in the Royal Society of Chemistry article, but one of his thoughts was, well, when I talk to students and colleagues who are afraid and talk about how, stifling it is on campus with censorship and what have you, he basically asks them, what instance do you have that happened to you? And they can't name one specifically that's happened to them. But at the same time, it's not necessarily that you have to name one, right? If you see it happen to somebody else that maybe you agree with, just like, it's very natural to be like, I don't want that to happen to me. That's horrible. Um,
Mhm. Yeah,
but
you do not need to live through this ostracism to get the message. That's exactly the devious strategy that works very well. That in Soviet Union they also knew. It's enough to ostracize and make a big case out of one victim, and that sends a chilling message to many, many, many. And in chemistry community, for example, the Samgivante Chemie fracas with Hadlitsky, with this guy who wrote an essay where he commented on some issues that he considered to be troubling, including DEI policies. So the paper was removed without retraction. The guy was he passed away recently, so he was heavily punished professionally, and
this is
the editor was
this is
Had,
Thomas Hoodlicky. Yeah.
Hadlitsky, yeah.
Hoodlicky.
So, and I heard myself from many people, professional bodies at universities, at professional societies, and it was so horrible, we cannot allow it to happen to us. Therefore, we have to put this policy, therefore, we have to put diversity statements, therefore, we have to do ABCD. So the chilling effect is very real. And, to give you another piece of data, after I wrote the Peril, I received a lot of emails, private emails, I think about 400, and about half of them were saying how brave I was to publish this piece, which, if you think about it, is already shocking, because in this piece I shared my personal history and just talked a little bit about how it feels. So I do not know why I should be considered to be brave to do so. And many people, without prompting, were saying that how afraid they are to say anything. And also, moreover, many were saying that they feel compelled to say things they do not believe. And there are many examples, people you can observe it at a faculty meeting when you know that people do not agree with a certain idea, but no one is willing to speak up. And everyone is, and there are examples, you could see these examples in committees and board discussion when people would just be absolutely terrorized and not willing to say what they think, and would also say things that they do not believe. So,
Mm.
I mean, I think it's beyond doubt. So we have data and we have stories and we have examples to show that.
Yeah, I have a few of my own in that because I work in climate professionally, but also conservative at the same time, which for my field sometimes might be considered a walking contradiction.
Mhm.
How could you be dealing with climate science and be a conservative at the same time? But I've spoken about this before in that I have always gotten more indirect harassment and commentary on campuses I've been on for being conservative than I ever have
Mhm.
from conservatives in the political right for being a climate scientist. So it's been really interesting that way. And I can understand to a degree a lot of the fear that's there because not knowing and being afraid to talk to anyone around you about what you think on certain things, you can
Mhm.
feel very alone. Um,
Yeah, so that's exactly why this diversity, equity, and inclusion is just a lie. Where is diversity of thought? Where are the conservative thought on campus? We do not want to hear from that, right? No. So, and you're not the first person to share these feelings, and I heard it also from students that do not feel that they can talk about their political views because they are on the conservative side of spectrum. Where is inclusion? Right? We are inclusive to everyone, but long list of people who are not welcome at
mhm.
you do not want. So that's yeah. So
I
that's
think when I think of inclusion as it's done in the sort of DEI thing, it comes to mind to me as it's inclusion if you agree.
right. Yeah, we include. Well, you know what is my kind of definition, operational definition of what DEI means?
Go for it.
So I call it, and I can support it by evidence: discrimination, entitlement, and intimidation. So
Okay.
that's what they do operationally. And
Okay. I'm curious why that name for the acronym.
well, discrimination because diversity is achieved by discriminatory policies like quotas for faculty hiring using immutable characteristics of people in various stages in funding, in hiring to discriminate against people who do not fit, do not fall into preferred categories. Entitlement because the idea of equity is antithetical to the idea of equality of opportunity, and equity demands equal outcomes. And I recently heard Kamala Harris quoted, who explained that equity means that we all end up in the same place. So, which is, of course, uh, completely antithetical to humanistic merit-based
Mm,
based approaches, because everyone should end up based on his or her talent, skills, and actions and achievements, and not by so. And intimidation, well, intimidation because inclusivity, is administered in a very heavy-handed, and only those who agree are included. And if you do not agree, you will be very explicitly chased out, excluded, and intimidated.
okay, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. I can tell Kieran in the chat just loves that
Good.
phrase. I may use that myself. And it really, yeah, it's just I kind of agree with the discriminatory part straight out of the gate because in particular because how do I put this? What I've noticed is that whenever there's a discussion of diversity, it automatically defaults to things that, for lack of a better way or to describe it, only skin deep. The assumption being inherent in there that you're a different race from me, therefore you think differently, which is not necessarily true. And actually, I've been meaning to ask Lee this question, is because I think if I recall correctly, in the literature in psychology and sociology, that's been demonstrated to not be true because the intra group variability in perspectives is actually greater than the variability between groups.
Well, it's racist and sexist because it's exactly this argument that was used to keep women out of science, because they were saying women cannot think like men. They are not rational, they are not quantitative, they cannot teach men, there is no place for women in science. And people like me and, early generations, we fought against that. We were saying that women can do science, and there is no such, being a woman does not make you less competent or less qualified than a male scientist. And that's what these diversity policies now directly oppose. They say, yeah, we need people of different races, people of different genders, even sexual orientation now. They somehow can think differently. So that's manifestly wrong and discriminatory.
Mm. And that's what I've said before privately to others. And admittedly, I will say, seeing you do what you've been doing, and getting out there, I
Mm-hmm.
have been much more vocal in my own workplace to say that some of this that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of this stuff is wrong, and to express my opinion on it, which I'm sure has been interesting for some of my coworkers, but I have been
Yeah.
much more vocal about it than I was. So thank you. I've been
Mm-hmm.
meaning to say that. Thank you for being an inspiration on that front, because I do think it's like we can't just have one person speaking out in the speaking out in the desert about all of these particular problems, because it's not going to get fixed with just one person.
Yeah, we need more people to speak up, actually. That's very important thing because I am absolutely confident that most people in the scientific community are generally in agreement with the ideas that you and I discuss and share, with the liberal values, with merit-based policies, with enlightenment. So I have no doubt about it. But many people are afraid to speak up, and the reason they give, okay, there is a fear of personal ostracism, and it's not to be taken lightly. I actually have a lot of empathy and I understand. I do not judge people that choose to retreat and not speak up because it's just very, very painful. And so then many people think, mistakenly, I think, they say it's a pendulum. It's like horrible, it's bad, it's wrong, but we do not need to do anything. It will come back. It will swing the other way. Now, that's manifestly wrong. It's not a pendulum, it's a ratchet. It's if you do not push back, it will only be tightened and taken even further. And then the third group of people, and actually not a small group, they explain their silence or their even vocal support of ideas that they do not agree with. They explain it by political expediency. They say, okay, and I actually get it from several people I respect. They say, Anna, I agree with what you say in your paper. And of course, this is all like wrong and nonsense, but you shouldn't be writing it because this paper will facilitate political gains for bad people, for Trump supporters. Things like that. So, so I mean, the idea is ridiculous that Trump supporters will run with the Peril and politicizing of
Well,
science.
and
But
that has been the demonization of folks like yourself and others that I've seen online. That you're just going for a right wing grift. You're just doing this for the Trump supporters, and just like, no,
right,
we're
which
doing
is
this because
yeah,
we're worried about science.
yeah, but that's very common, and some people actually do believe that, and they say, yeah, we should not criticize these things because they would result in political loss for the party we believe is on the right side of things, and that's more important. So we are back to this. Uh, Goal justifies the means, right? Aim justifies the means mentality, and to that, I say that we see this example of thinking in many instances, and where people would suppress the truth in the name of greater good, with the goal to defend their institutions. You can think about many, many cases of horrible sexual harassment in churches, in universities, in athletic teams, where I'm sure none of the leadership would support this atrocious behaviors, but they leaders were suppressing and keeping them quiet and not punishing the perpetrators because it would harm the institution. And protecting the institution is more important than truth. And I manifestly disagree with that. I think truth is more important than political games and partisanship, than institutions. So we should never compromise the truth with the goal to win election or protect our university or athletic team.
Well, and it's at least when I look at it in history, it always seems like things have gone wrong in science and bad things have happened in the name of science when we've subverted that pursuit of the truth with ideology. I can think of a number of different things that led to eventually the atrocities from that led to the creation of the Belmont Report, for instance, which gives us the institutional review boards and those governing bodies, which are there for very good reasons. Um, this seems to be the same thing to me. That would you willingly subvert the truth to benefit your own preferred ideology advancing? But that would then tell me that if you're doing that as a scientist, well, you're not really practicing that norm of disinterestedness all that well if you end up doing that as part of your profession, which then presents a problem.
Yeah, I heard, a person who is much more articulate and presents this idea in much better way than I can. Gad Saad, he's professor from Canada. I recently heard his talk about academic freedom and free speech and truth. And then he said this argument very clearly. He said there is this, you can cleave to truth, and truth is always more important, or you can think as a consequentialist. And consequential is that, okay, so what are consequences if I say something? It's not whether it's right or wrong, but what are the consequences? And then he kind of starts with a simple example. He said, if my wife asks, do I look fat in these jeans? I would never say yes. So that's a consequentialist mentality. But then he goes to much more serious examples. And he gives examples from recent political discourse saying, yeah, I believe in presumption of innocence, but, and then, certain, I believe in the freedom of speech and academic freedom, but, and people put all kinds of arguments that are of the sort that I described, that the consequences could be so much grimmer that we should not say the truth because
Well, and that seems to be that is the thing of postmodernism, that power matters more than the truth. And so it becomes totally fair to then go into different narratives, even if they don't line up with what is the truth. But then again, in a postmodernist realm, they don't necessarily think objective reality exists.
I heard them saying that. They say they object that truth exists and objective reality. They object to the idea that knowledge is power. They say no, it's power that controls knowledge. They yeah, I heard it myself, and of course we read papers, you and I, where they articulate it in a very direct way. So there is no interpretation. They make it very clear what they mean.
Well, and it's also the social constructivism kind of thing, that everything is just a constructive society. In which case, I almost want to say, well, okay, what if it's probably one of the most crazy things of the social constructive thing is the idea of your truth and my truth in here. And so I almost want to say to that argument of social constructivism, well, what if it's your truth that climate change is happening as human cause, but it's my truth or somebody else's truth that it's not? You can't tell them that they're wrong if it's your truth.
Well, they do have answers to that. They would run the oppression scale, and if you come high enough on the victimhood mentality, then your truth carries more weight than the other person's truth. So everything is social construct, and that's actually idea which I was exposed in Russia, because in Russia the belief was that we can build a new man and woman, and we can change people, and if party can make you become what party wants you to become. So they were very opposed to biological determinism. And that's also like one of the reasons I liked Lysenko, because Lysenko was very much also against genes and chromosomes and biological determinism. If party wants pineapples grow in Siberia, they will grow in Siberia. So that's
Despite the fact that that's, as we now know, physically impossible to grow pineapples in Siberia. But
yeah. Not if party, yeah.
yeah, not if
So
party says yes. If party says
yeah,
because
if
I
party says
remember,
yes, yeah.
yeah, if I remember correctly with Lysenko, it was that he really thought that you could just change the environment and it would learn a seed or a plant would learn from the particular environment it was put in and pass that on to its next generation so that you could continue to grow wheat in the winter, for
Yeah,
instance. Utterly
yeah.
failed, and we know how that ended up with a famine in Ukraine. Um, but it's
I'm trying to find the recent quote I wanted to read, but it was from the Journal of Chemical Education when they published this. I mean, it's just another crazy paper, but
was it the decolonizing chemistry article or
no, it was even better than that. So I really want to read this quote. Give me just 1 second. So that was actually following up the collection of 67 papers on diverse on decolonizing. So, but that was more recent. So let me read it. I have it here. Yeah. So it's a paper in chemical education. So that's a respected journal published, formerly respected journal published by American Chemical Society. So they have a paper that presents a class, a special topic class in chemistry on feminism and science as a tool to disrupt this conscious racism in STEM. So the course was taught in an American university, so it's not a hoax and it's not a proposal, it was already taught. And then paper describes what this course was, and here is what I like a lot. So this course explores the development and interrelationship between quantum mechanics, Marxist materialism, Afrofuturism, pessimism, and post-colonial nationalism. Then they say, to problematize time as a linear social construct. The Copenhagen interpretation of the collapse of wave-particle duality was utilized. I mean,
holy
you
mackerel.
think it's a hoax. I actually first think when I saw it, I emailed Peter Bogosian and I said, is it you're doing? He said, no, like every time you see crazy paper. So I know that these people exist, they're real people from real university, but that's what kind of, social, so even time is social construct now.
That oh my gosh, that reminds me of the article a couple years ago in the American Physical Society published it. I think it was in their physics education journal.
Oh yeah, whiteness in the classroom. Observing about white supremacy in classrooms that manifested itself by discussion in the classroom centered around whiteboard.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a smoking gun. Now, but what is more shocking, Adrian, I was following this case, and okay, the paper is like absolute garbage, like similar to what I just read, but and then many people mocked and criticized it.
I was one of that.
Yeah, and then what was really surprising that American Physical Society and editorial board, they felt compelled to put statements up saying that they reject these criticisms as unprofessional, and so really defending the paper, which I never heard about professional society or editors defending a certain paper against criticism from the community. So they did that. And then they emphasized professionalism, that if people have critiques, they should publish it professionally. I completely agree. I think that's how the Khodlytsky, that's what I think how Khodlytsky case with angewandte chemie should have been managed. with professional comments. So anyway, a group of physicists published a very measured professional critique of this paper, explaining multiple flaws of this paper. And then they tried to publish it. And guess what? It wasn't published. So they went all the way and appealed to the highest authorities, and the paper was ultimately rejected. And one of the arguments was that they critique this whiteness in physics classroom paper using scientific method, and it's not the approach that authors took, and you cannot criticize their approach by using other methodology.
Yes.
So anyway, so this paper is available on archive, and I think Lawrence Krauss wrote about it also on Quillette.
I talked about the whole chain of events all the way through on the last SciChat Saturday. Actually, I was by myself, but it was. I deliberately made a point to read the entire comment all the way through from start to beginning, and then read the critiques of the editors, which authors had handily included at the end in the archive. And I was so stunned because I'm just like, you have no reason to not publish. You have no reason to. Yeah, you have every reason to publish this. Let's put it this in a better language. They had every reason to publish it. The reasons not to publish it were ridiculous. And to the note of, you're not critiquing it from the same lens. Essentially, you're not doing it from the same critical social justice lens. Well, hold on a second. If you're after diversity, as you purportedly claim to be, wouldn't you welcome people looking at it from a totally different perspective? So that's
Indeed.
I was really harsh with the American Physical Society with that one and the journal there, because it was.
Well, they just published another beauty. I saw it.
Oh, really?
Yesterday. Yeah, I will send it to you. It's like on the same scale.
Oh dear, I'm gonna have to look at that then. That'll be fun.
It's about energy and equity. So they use the connection between energy and equity in physics classroom.
Oh no. Oh goodness. But it drives me crazy because some of this stuff is now funded by like NSF. I've talked about this.
Whoops, you are absolutely correct, because it is very disturbing that NSF published this other paper, so they acknowledge it in the acknowledgement, and this new paper is also funded by NSF. So that's, it's really wrong on so many levels that National Science Foundation supports explicitly anti-scientific papers and papers that are detrimental. And then, just a pure pragmatic concern, taxpayer money that we need dearly to invest into science and promoting science, they are being channeled and diverted to this garbage. So it is really shocking.
But yeah, it also reminds me of NSF was funding something called QuantCrit, which is a whole idea now that, when we observe a disparity, we're supposed to figure out why that disparity exists. But no, this is now going to be a whole quantitative analytics groups that just start from the assumption that any disparity they find is because of some kind of systemic discrimination rather than actually proving that. It's just like,
yeah.
Okay, wait, NSF, you're funding something, and right at the bottom it's an NSF funded thing. You're funding this that is something that is very anti-scientific, because you're not supposed to, as a scientist anyway, start from a conclusion.
Right, and then work up how you can massage evidence to fit into your conclusion. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They start from it, and that's
So. I did have a question, actually, to go back to it real quick, with Luana's students. Were these freshmen that she was debating, or did she say?
That I do not know.
Who were debating, I'm sorry.
Undergraduate students, yeah, but she said that the dynamic was really awful, and one student who was assigned to defend this controversial idea. He started with long disclaimer saying how he doesn't agree with what he's about to say, but and then he started to say what he already says that he doesn't believe, but has to say because he was assigned. And then she said, like the other students who were on the same team, they started pulling their chairs away from him and kind of trying to distance and express their contempt to this idea. I mean, it was just awful. Yeah.
Yeah, because the other thing that concerns me with the politicization of STEM is if students are being taught in K through 12 that such things are politicized and just coming in with that mindset already. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the folks that I go back and forth with is Deb Philman, who runs a podcast called The Reason We Learn, where she focuses on K through 12 issues. So she and I have gone back and forth on science education and the like. And it would seem to me that in K through 12 now in the United States, despite the fact that I talked about this ad nauseum, and it's really terrifying to me that I think it's less than a quarter of students are graduating high school with proficiency in science now, in the United States, which is dramatically concerning. And I've heard from a few folks who are like, yeah, I'm having to teach remedial calculus and
Mm-hmm.
mathematics when my students come in because they didn't learn it in high school to the degree that
Mm-hmm.
they needed to. But they are being taught in high school that they can't offend anybody, that their feelings are paramount over everything else. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
you obviously don't want to go out of your way to hurt somebody's feelings or be really
Mm-hmm.
nasty to somebody, but at the same time, if you can't express something because you're afraid of offending someone, so that's what I was thinking of when I was that's why I was wondering what year were the students, because are they going
Yeah,
in with
yeah,
that thing of we can't debate because I can't offend anybody?
yeah. I heard this quote from Sigmund Freud, I think, who said that a man who hurled an insult at his opponent instead of a rock was the founder of civilization. And I find it deeply profound because, yeah, that's exactly the point, that words are not the same as violence.
Mm.
Throwing insult or communicating something that offend or maybe even make people deeply uncomfortable or sad or whatever, it's not the same as punching them in the face. It's just not. There is a big difference. And that line get blurred and actively kind of removed because children are taught in the school that feelings matter, and that's propagated through this under the inclusivity banner, right? And then they explicitly these policies, and they have some examples from editorial boards, but in school it's the same. They say that intent doesn't matter.
Mm.
It's a feeling of the offended that matter, which is exactly opposite to the objectivity, to asking a question: was it really offensive? Was there bad intent? Or which should be uh, central for judging this. But yeah, schools are a big problem, and you're absolutely right that students are graduating with much lower proficiency now. So we see it everywhere. At universities, we have to deal with this. Now, I spoke recently with several high school teachers from the area, and I have some insight of how it's happening. So, and of course, COVID was, shutdowns, COVID that wasn't healthy, wasn't good for the school, but social justice, quote unquote, is partially responsible to what we are observing. And the way it works is that schools are, many school districts now want to remove failing grades because it's not equitable. And what they're also doing, they're implementing policies like students, they penalize teachers for not allow teachers even to use deadlines for taking points out if something is not delivered on time. They use this 50% rule, 50% rule.
Mm. No, I don't know the 50% rule.
So they started it during COVID time. but some schools still use it. So, and it is like that. So if a student turned in an assignment, then the teacher cannot give the student less than 50% of points, regardless of what is in the assignment. It could be like an empty piece of paper with a name, that's 50%. And that's, of course, really hurts the students, that they do not have motivation and they do not have structure, and they do not learn as well as they could have been if schools operated the way they should. And it's really awful. And what is most awful is that it affects most disadvantaged students the most, because students from affluent families, they have their family support, and can have parents who would make them learn stuff at home. But students that are coming from disadvantage, they do not have it. And then instead of getting proper school education, they are let out with this substandard preparation, which is, really awful.
Yeah, and it's those kinds of things that get me nervous for the future of our various disciplines in science, and the intentional politicization of it all. Yes, you guys hit it very well in the In Defense of Merit article. The idea that yes, we do have our biases, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea to intentionally inject ideological leanings into science. That history would show us that seems to end badly. But
every time they tried it, it ended badly. So you would think people should learn by now.
But it's not. Go back to not teaching history. Unfortunately, not teaching enough of the history of science and just general history anymore. But there we go. This is interesting. Occasionally, if I'm not moving my mouse enough, all my monitors turn off. I've just realized.
Okay.
So, if I suddenly look like I'm panicked, that's the reason why. Odd detail. I don't know why that's happening, so I'll have to fix that. But yeah, I wonder about a lot of things that can be done in those kinds of situations. But I wonder also, in a sense, if there's frustration that comes from younger generations of scientists. And for me, one of the reasons I very, very much dislike DEI as it currently is, and have gotten much more vocal in my own in my own workplace, is because like up all the way through graduate school, all of my primary mentors were men and things along that line. And, never once ever did I ever have to deal with sexism in my career. I had it great. I didn't have one of those kinds of remarks or things like that. And I understand that's not true for everybody, but never did I ever have to deal with sexism until I had to deal with folks who had their heads so buried deep in the DEI kind of mindset that they didn't realize that some of the things that they were saying to me was very, very sexist. And so that's like one of my favorites is a site visit I was at a couple of months ago. Well, you know how it is as a woman in science. No, I don't. I don't have the same experiences that you do, and that's a very bad assumption to make. So I wonder how much of that is going to eventually going to turn off folks from going to that profession.
Well, that's a very good point, because we hear all these lengthy victimhood stories, how it's like, again, published in Science and Nature, all these long grievance stories about how it's horrible to be a woman in science, or black in science, or what's not. And they are not supported by objective reality. And there are actually quantitative studies that show it. So very recently, right after our merit, the paper by Sessi and co-workers was published. And what this paper is about, it's a meta-analysis study of papers purporting anti-women bias in STEM. And they did very thorough study I don't know if you read this paper yet. You might have seen it.
I did read it. I hadn't had the
Yeah.
chance to talk about it on the channel yet.
So excellent paper, and they basically, and what is interesting, two of the co-authors went into this collaboration that sure that there are biases, and partially based on their own experiences, because again, early generations experience this. It's real, I experienced it myself, my colleagues even more. So, but anyway, after they looked at the data in, I think, 5 domains: publication, recommendation letter, hiring, teaching evaluation, and salaries. And after they did proper analysis, controlling for confounding factors, the way things should be done, they came with the conclusion that in the past 10 years, there are no biases against women except for teaching evaluations, maybe. And as far as hiring is concerned, there is a bias for women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very important paper that documents that climate has changed, and some things that were prevalent, they are no longer true. They are not a reality. But of course, DI people will not like this idea, because if problem is solved, why do we need DI? So because their livelihood depends on racism and sexism and what's not. And if all the barriers are gone, if there are no biases, if we achieved, ideal world, these people will do something to kind of bring them back, because they will have to give up their salaries.
Mm-hmm. People who are there because there's a problem supposedly that they have to fix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they like to promote these ideas, which I think are wrong. Well, we know that they're not supported by the data, but what you said is very true, that they will actually may discourage some people to go into the science, right? So saying, okay, why would I want to go to this horrible place dominated by racist, sexist, and sexual harassers?
Well, and in the other vein, the other thing that I know has been occurring to me is because there are some grant proposals that require a section now, not necessarily describing your fidelity to DEI principles or anything like that, but describing how your research team is diverse, and diverse in that very skin deep kind of sense. And I hate that this has occurred to me a few times, in that when I've been asked to be on proposals, and I'm pretty sure if some of my peers were thinking about it, they might think similarly. But it's occurred to me that sometimes I'm often now left asking the question of, are you asking me to be part of your proposal because I'm a woman, or because I'm very accomplished in my field? And it's actually really concerning to me that at times, because of the way things have pervaded in academia and in the grant writing world, that I can't tell the difference. I'm not sure what the difference is. And it's kind of discouraging, because it does really force a bit of imposter syndrome, particularly for like young scientists who are a bit new in it, that like, well, am I good, or are you hiring me? Or are you asking me to do this because I'm X?
Yeah, same goes with the conference invitation. Are you inviting me because I'm a woman, or because you want to hear from me? Same is true with awards and honors now. So now you cannot tell, did I get my recent award because I am so good, or because I am a woman? I do not know anymore. And that actually is, I think, very damaging by creating biases. So something that we were so good to dismantle, biases against women, perceiving women as being of a less capable scientist, and all that. So I thought that we achieved great progress by removing this misperception. Now, with all the social engineering policies, people are not stupid. So they see that it's happening. Now, what kind of message does it send? It sends that women are not capable to compete in the open marketplace of ideas. That's why we use this social engineering. It means women are not good. So it's really, instead of removing biases, it creates and revives biases, and and of course, for individuals, so it's hurtful, I mean, now I really mean hurtful.
Yeah,
Not
no,
in
hurtful in a real genuine sense, not
in a
just
real,
I'm
yeah,
offended.
in a real genuine sense. And it's damaging much broader because it implants these ideas and perpetuates them that, you know.
Yeah, that it does. And I guess that one of the larger things, of course, because science is not in a vacuum. So we can look at the history of science and think of all the amazing things that science as a discipline and as a process has done with cures for cancer, getting us to the
Mhm.
moon, well, not cures for cancer, treatments for cancer, getting us to the moon, all these other kinds of things. And over and over and over again in different surveys with Pew Research and others, scientists writ large are considered to be among those with the greatest confidence by the American public and
Mhm.
by just general groups. And so, but that starts to become damaged. And like the recent example is Nature Human Behavior Research
Mhm.
that looked at nature's decision to endorse President Biden in the 2020 election and found that, yeah, you really didn't help anything with the election, but you sure as heck damaged your own credibility. And then Nature editorial board deciding, no, we do it again anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that was quite amazing. Yes.
Just like, really? Um, but that's actually something I think about a lot too, because scientists do have a position of trust in just the general public, presuming that we're
Mhm.
actually doing our job of going after the truth. But we can do so much to damage that. And that Nature
Mhm.
article was only the most recent example. If scientists are starting to be perceived as biased as a whole, not as individuals, but as a whole in one particular direction. And that's actually something I worry about because, you know,
You should. I'm worried about it too because this mistrust when the public perceives scientists as just another clique that has their like cynical special interests and want to pull public money for something which just promotes individual scientists or groups and is not about truth seeking is extremely damaging. Now, there are actually, again, we do not need to speculate about it. There is a research, there is this scientist, I think, from Harvard, Dan Kahan, and he has papers where he looked into public acceptance of scientific consensus.
mm,
And I think we cite one or two of them in the merit paper. And I myself traditionally used to think that denial of scientific facts correlates with the educational level. And
mm,
people who are more educated are less likely to deny some simple facts like the earth is round, vaccines are working, that sort of thing. Now, it turns out that's not the case. And his research shows that people are more likely to deny finding. So there is practically no correlation with their education, but there is a huge correlation of whether they perceive topic to be politicized and how political opinions are divided in it. And he uses examples of climate, of vaccination, and other examples, and it's clear that public mistrust correlates with whether they think that this topic is political and my or other parties have a certain position on it, and that's how they accept or reject the findings, and it's extremely dangerous.
yeah. And I think thinking of the different politicians, of course, who approve different budgets for
Mhm.
funding agencies and what have you, if you get to the point where one field is so politicized, you do run into the problem of science funding suddenly suddenly disappears from something if that discipline is perceived as
Mhm.
being politicized or potentially so. That would be like what.
Well, also these political recent legislatures that are coming from the right, which many of these bills are not good, and some of them are attacking tenure as a concept, and so I disagree with them, but I can see that one of the reasons that some of the effects that prompted them is this mistrust in universities and seeing universities as political agents. And if university is not dedicated to truth seeking, but dedicated to running a political lobbying and campaigns, then it's a very legitimate reaction of legislators. Say, okay, we will take your budgets, remove your protections, and that also will be damaging. But I think the way to fight against it is to restore institutional neutrality, remove this political component from our universities and separate university mission from political activism. So this is essential to restore this trust in universities by public, by politicians, by the society.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not a big fan of what I'm seeing certain things out of
Mhm,
some state legislatures pushing for, we need to get rid of this thing and that thing and ripping apart academia and what
mhm,
have you. I do think there is at times some merit to the idea of having boards of trustees who are not themselves academics because they can be mindful of that kind of
mhm,
issue of politicization. And yeah, I'm not surprised to see that because people are not stupid. They do see that
mhm,
universities have gone a particular direction, which is concerning. And they react to that, and they react to that through their state legislators
mhm,
doing the things that they would do. And so I also wonder though at this point, and there's been a couple of I go back and forth on this, is are the universities too far gone, at this point to need to do something new? Um So I think there was a Minding the Campus article about this I talked about earlier this week, where the argument was basically science should leave the university, shouldn't have professors at universities, should have them, form their own sort of research guilds and work in contract with the university, but not be at a university
Well,
subject to the bureaucracy.
so it would be very hard to achieve because science costs money. And money is disbursed by federal agencies, by National Science Foundation, by National Institutes of Health, by Department of Energy. And these organizations will not give money to some private guilds. And moreover, as I learned recently, um, I attended the summit at the University of Austin in Texas. It's a new university that is aspiring to be a university that is not saddled by these
Mhm.
issues. So they wanted to start a new thing from scratch. They're doing pretty well, actually. I'm cheering for them. Now, what I learned through these interactions there is that uh, I mean, it's always difficult to build a university. You need to invest into infrastructure, you need buildings. For science buildings, of course, it's even more money because you have to put all this equipment. So, in addition to that, there is a big barrier to a new university to get federal funding because in order to be eligible to federal funding, you need to satisfy to install certain bureaucracies such as Title IX, Title VI, which are extremely costly and also often adversarial to the ideas of academic freedom, free speech, and so on. So, and something has to change in legislation, right? So I think a big problem is with how funding agencies are now operating, and they became politicized, and they, as we discussed, like what NSF is doing and what Department of Energy is doing. So I think legislation should look into this and maybe completely disband and build them from scratch, such that these political influence is not affecting their function, and then maybe universities will can be saved, or maybe some new units can be formed. But this is a really big problem that without it, you cannot just go on the open market and start your own lab.
Yeah, I think I made that point earlier this week too, where
Mhm.
there's a certain amount of regulatory bureaucratic things that go on every
Mhm.
time you get a grant proposal,
Mm.
that oftentimes it's university offices that help the PIs of different grants fill out that paperwork or do the filling out of that paperwork
Mhm.
um, for them. Oh, I forgot.
It's not just filling the paperwork. No, you have to be eligible. University has to pass certain certification, and they have to have these bureaucracies to say that they are compliant with Title IX and Title VI. So it's not just paperwork; it's more than that.
Yeah, which is hard to do in a new institution, but
Mhm.
it also in a way kind of pushes existing institutions toward whatever the political preference of the funding agency is, which is not healthy either. Just
Mhm.
I admittedly chuckle when I hear about scientific integrity officers at different at different agencies because I don't know that they're really doing their jobs right now.
Yeah, yeah. So where is this? Yeah,
So,
uh,
for those of you in the chat, if you want to start, you're welcome to add in more questions here because I know we'll probably wrap up here in the next half an hour because I think I have a hard out at
mhm.
1 o'clock. So, um, with other things going on, and so feel free to ask away if you have questions. But I know, like some of the things that are on my mind is for those of us who are in my position, we're young scientists and trying to navigate this mess. We don't have protections of tenure, and admittedly, it's pretty damn terrifying to speak out against your university when you're a postdoc or young research scientist. You don't have tenure. You may never get tenure as a protection. Um, what kinds of advice would you have for folks like in my position or other young scientists who are concerned but scared?
It's a very difficult question because you can add to this list people who are on academic market and applying for academic positions and ask to put these diversity statements, which are political litmus tests. And you see young people who are like desperate to do what they like to do, science, and they are presented with this choice. Okay, in order to enter, you have to profess your acceptance of these ideas. So I think it's a very difficult line to walk because you do not want to jeopardize your career, because you really want to be able to do science, to do what you like, to do what is ultimately good for society because you're passionate about science. At the same time, to completely kind of give up any resistance and accept wholesale all this political pressure would be a mistake because that would ultimately completely destroy science. And I think it's important to organize and find like-minded individuals. And there are some organizations that could provide some protections. For example, FIRE is doing great, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, defending people who get professional consequences for speaking out. Academic Freedom Alliance, that's more narrow in focus and supporting faculty and academic staff. So has been quite effective in pushing back. But what should we do with funding agencies? Like, what should I do next time I have to write a Department of Energy grant? I have funding from DOE. What should I put into this diversity statement? It's a hard personal choice. I do not know what I will do because I do not want to lie. But if I write, that I will, if I say that I believe in the colorblind Martin Luther King type of approach to diversity, that may have negative consequences. So, yeah, maybe we should think about creating a more focused organization, professional organization that would help stem younger and more established faculty to protect them and protect these ideas and being able to communicate them as a group, because there is a safety in numbers. So maybe if we all get organized, it will be easier for everyone to speak up and not get persecuted for that. So many people made this suggestion actually already, that we need some sort of an organization to fight for that. And the more I think about it, I think there is a merit in this idea.
That would be actually, I think, a really great idea. And this actually is a great question because you've been so many different places in the world. Rick G asks if there's any countries where this isn't a problem.
Well, that is not. Well, there are some countries, but you do not want to go there. I think in Russia they do not have wokeness, but they have their own problems now. So China doesn't seem to be affected by wokeness, and again, it's a strange case now where if you, again, a bit reminiscent of late Soviet Union, if you keep your head low and do not challenge the Communist Party, then it's operating by merit largely. So, but again, it's I wouldn't go.
Yeah,
I would go to work there. But what else? I cannot think about any other country, because in Europe it's very widespread in many countries. I hear from friends in Israel where it's not present to such extent as here, but there are signs of it. So I think it's spreading quite fast over everywhere.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and in the vein of Europe, I know Kieran, who's in the chat, he's talked about this publicly, so I don't think he'll mind me mentioning that he went back to university during the pandemic because he's a photojournalist, so he couldn't go out and about and do that, but went back to finish his degree at the university and he was writing on his topic having to do with Black Lives Matter, and he was saying something very controversial about that organization, and he was subsequently actually the victim of a university attempted mobbing in the UK. And it all worked out well because he managed to win that argument and graduate with honors, despite the attempt of his fellow students to actually get, as I recall, and Kieran can correct me if I'm wrong, the petition was that the university shouldn't award a degree to this journalist who's professing these race, I think they called them racist ideas or something like that. So
it's very easy. Yeah, it's very easy to be called racist. Some people called our merit paper racist apology.
I saw
that. So you say that people should be judged by their merit. So we shouldn't use people immutable characteristics for, making appointments and award, and they say it's racist apology.
I think when I originally covered Dorian's the debacle with MIT that Dorian had some years ago, there was somebody who commented on the YouTube video that started calling me all sorts of things, so like racist white nationalist person. I'm like, what did I say? But yeah, that's I wonder, because I note you're still on the leadership team for the Academic Freedom Alliance, if there would be a thought of maybe creating a student or an early career sort of branch that just focuses on protecting those groups of students and inviting those.
Yeah, I can bring this idea to the committee, and because that, again, FIRE has some of it and some resources for students how to organize, but maybe AFA have to build it up, because I think it's a good idea, because sometimes it's even not easy to disentangle, like when because some cases involve students and faculty. Now back to your original question, what you can do as a young researcher. I will send you, I have this book. Actually I have it here. I have lots of books on my desk which it's different levels of being finished, but this one I did finish. So it's an excellent book, Counter Workcraft, written by someone who is a professor in North American University, and he writes under pseudonym.
I haven't finished it yet myself.
So I found it extremely useful because it shows that there are range of actions an individual can take, and there are some small things, really small things, that are not scary, not will not put you on no-fly list, and that you can enact to push back. And some things that he recommends, for example, are so simple. For example, he talks about how it is important to insist that protocols are being followed with committees, with faculty meeting, such as adherence to the agenda, so people do not deviate, and secret ballot voting for important things. Very simple, and it's already a rule. So we just need to insist that it's followed when we are present. And the secret ballot, I heard several accounts from people who were describing to me how they witnessed how certain groups of people, committees, boards were hijacked and bullied into voting into something that majority do not agree. But because the work managed to push it through the open vote, and because topic was controversial and people were afraid to be called, names, they voted in the open vote for something they didn't believe. So so there are like a number of things young people could do without jeopardizing their career, and not high risk things, but nevertheless effective. And these small things, I believe, add up. And if everyone does a little bit, we may have a chance.
A little bit. Yeah, we can save things here. Actually, Kieran was mentioning this was what got said about him. He was called mentally deficient because of his project for one of his courses.
That's actually very good. I like it, mentally deficient. That's beautiful. Now, why I like it? Because when people say that the comparison between Soviet times and current situation is hyperbolic, like in Soviet time during Brezhnev, they at some point came to the realization that it's like almost 70 years past revolution, and all people coming from all these hostile classes, they already died, and we have like several generations of new people. And how come we have dissidents? So and then they came. It kind of contradicts the idea that socialist ideas win out, and so and they came with this brilliant idea that people that oppose regime, they are not dissidents, they are mental. They have sluggish schizophrenia, and they should be subjected to mental treatment. So they have this punitive psychiatry type of arrangements where many dissidents were put into this, and some were turned to vegetable state because they weren't just the prison. They really subjected these people to treatment. And recently, I heard about the case in the US. A student in a medical school, I believe, was taking part of mandatory diversity training session, where they were taught about microaggressions, and the student challenged the idea of microaggressions, that they are exist and that they are significant. So the student was expelled, I think it was medical program, and recommended to undergo psychological assessment because he objected to this idea. So the student sued and won. So that was a success case. But is it hyperbolic comparison to paint people who disagree with the current orthodoxy as mentally deficient? Well, so you judge.
I didn't know this, Kieran. You didn't tell me this one. That apparently it was the acting head of the psychology school.
Of course, so it's even better. So it's someone with authority to declare you're mentally deficient. Yeah. I mean, so here, if you're interested about this, so that's another book which I read recently called Judgment in Moscow. So by Soviet dissident Vladimir Bukovsky.
Okay.
And this book, it's very little commentary of him, but it's mostly copies of memoranda from Central Committee of Communist Party that he managed to get hold of, photocopy, and bring out. And it has parts that document these conversations among Central Committee about this this psychiatric asylums where dissidents should be put, because of course a normal non-mental people cannot object, cannot oppose the regime. And
Yeah. That's really fascinating. I didn't know that was a thing, to just in the Soviet Union to start calling people mentally deficient, and it goes back
uh,
to the
I
history.
may, yeah, I may even find some quotes if you give me a moment, which I
Sure.
think are great, that describe the symptoms of this sluggish schizophrenia that was the most prominent diagnosis for these dissidents. Here I have. Uh, so yeah, diagnosis sluggish schizophrenia. Symptoms included, so listen, pessimism, poor social adaptation, and conflict with authorities. Also, additional red flags that would justify this diagnosis: reform delusions. If you argue for reforms, right? So that, or perseverance.
Holy.
So that's, well, it's like me, right? I keep writing these papers. So that's right there. And the last one, struggle for the truth.
You're kidding.
No, I am not. I totally not.
And
So
they
yeah,
and and this was a symptom of, if I heard you right, sluggish schizophrenia, or
yeah. And they also use this term, which was very common. It's like philosophical intoxication. So if you disagree with ideas, but yeah, this guy Bukovsky, so he has several books. Also, his autobiographical books, which is much shorter. I can send you PDF. It's translated in English, where he described how he himself got subjected to this. And he get it kind of lucky because he was not subjected to actual treatments. He just spent some time in this mental asylum for assessment, which, yeah.
that's just
Yeah.
amazingly creepy. And yeah, I the reason it dawns on me that it's amazingly creepy, yeah, and this is that I know with some of the social emotional learning stuff that's being promoted in K through 12, there's this whole kind of mindset that certain behaviors are bad that would fall into that list
Mhm,
actually. So that's where I'm just like, that's just bloody scary reading that and knowing what I've heard. This again, talking with Deb Philman at The Reason We Learn, she's actually uncovered quite a fair bit of this, and James Lindsay is going after it too.
mhm,
With that kind of commentary lately, noticing that that seems to be a thing to just start labeling people who disagree as there's something wrong with you mentally, which
mhm, mhm.
is
Yep,
extremely disturbing.
yep. It's another idea that was tried successfully before.
Successfully in terms of shutting people down, yes, but not. Oop, uh-oh, I can't hear you. I cannot hear you. You got muted. I think I think your headphones may have died. I still can't hear you. Uh-oh. So in the settings section down there, you can change the microphone. Yeah, where it's
How is
oh,
now?
yes, I can hear you now. There we go.
Okay. So I think my headphones died, but this computer mic is working. Right.
Well,
Okay.
that's good. That I'm glad we got you back. But yeah, I was just saying I've seen that kind of echo of that come up in the social emotional learning kind of space that, you're
Mhm.
not a properly social person unless you have like XYZ behavior, and
Mhm.
it's extremely creepy.
It is. It is. And we see examples of trying to do that, like we just heard from Kieran. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But all in all, it presents a problem because, at least for science, which where I'm most concerned, is that you start taking people out of science or forcing people out of science who are provide very different perspectives, and
Mm.
then, well, we in a way we need those different perspectives to actually be able to get at the truth, because if somebody is biased in one particular way and they're ignoring something, and then we check with another person who has
Mhm.
different bias, and from the usage of merit and the desire for getting at the truth, not at whatever ideology is most desired, you actually can get at the truth, which can hopefully keep society away from a lot of problems or solve a lot of problems in society at the same time. But if truth is not the focus, then
Mhm.
real diversity of thought suffers in science, and I think science in the long term suffers tremendously.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
But and I don't know if I have anything else to add. Do you have any closing thoughts you want to leave with?
Yeah, it was fun to talk. And again, I'm really happy you are doing this sort of things because I think it's important for people to hear, to see that there are people that challenge these dogmas that are dominating the discourse. And I am an optimist, so I hope that things can become better.
I hope so too, and I've been seeing more and more people pushing back, and I know there's more folks in my position as young scientists at universities, or just starting their postdoc or just graduating grad school, that are concerned but afraid.
Mhm.
And hopefully, I do hope they give a lot of those folks the ability to, well, not the ability, but the encouragement to
Mhm.
stand up for what they think is right. Um,
Encouragement and maybe protection, like, through these organizations and maybe new organization, because I think there's some actionable points that we can follow up on, and that could be, a key to
yeah,
way up.
yeah, definitely, definitely, and keep science around for all the good things that it does, and not turn it into any more dogmatic activism. I
Yeah.
think is the point there. But alrighty, I think we can wrap up right here. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much, Anna. It's been such a joy to have you. And hopefully come back sometime, um, to chat some more. But thank you all so much. Thank you for joining on SciChat Saturday. If you're watching the replay, thank you for watching again. As always, I'm Adrian. May you all stay curious.